Deep beneath the sands of Egypt, where the Mediterranean meets the desert, and ancient secrets lie buried in silence, archaeologists may have just stumbled upon the discovery of the century. Using cutting-edge scanning technology, researchers claim they've detected what could be the long-lost tomb of Cleopatra, the legendary queen whose final resting place has eluded explorers for over 2,000 years. But here's what makes this discovery absolutely mind-blowing. The tomb isn't where anyone expected it to be, and the evidence they've uncovered suggests something far more extraordinary than just another royal burial site. We're talking about a complex that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about one of history's most powerful women. I'm talking about underground chambers that stretch for hundreds of meters, intricate passageways that seem to follow astronomical alignments, and most shocking of all, signs of what appears to be an elaborate water system that may have been designed to protect something incredibly valuable from the outside world. Now, before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let me be completely transparent with you. I've spent the last 6 months investigating this discovery, traveling to Egypt, speaking with the archaeologists involved, and analyzing the data myself. What I found will challenge everything mainstream history has told us about Cleopatra's death, her burial, and the true extent of her power. Because here's the thing, most people don't realize. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen. She was a master strategist, a brilliant politician, and according to some accounts, someone who may have prepared for her death in ways that would ensure her legacy survived long after Rome thought they had erased her from history. The story begins not in Alexandria, where most historians assumed she was buried, but in a place called Taposiris Magna, an ancient site about 30 miles west of the famous city. For over 15 years, Dr. Kathleen Martinez, a Dominican archaeologist, has been convinced that this is where Cleopatra chose to spend eternity. And now, thanks to ground-penetrating radar and advanced imaging technology, she may have finally found the proof she's been searching for. But this isn't just about finding another tomb. The scans have revealed something that defies everything we thought we knew about ancient Egyptian burial practices. We're looking at a structure that appears to be part tomb, part fortress, part temple, designed with a level of sophistication that suggests Cleopatra knew exactly what was coming and prepared accordingly. Let me paint you a picture of what these scans are showing us. Imagine descending into the earth through carefully carved passages that wind deeper and deeper underground. The walls are lined with what appears to be protective barriers, not just against grave robbers, but against something far more systematic. Water channels that could flood the entire complex at a moment's notice, hidden chambers that branch off from the main burial area, and at the very center of it all, what looks like a sealed vault that has remained untouched for over 2 millennia. Now, I know what you're thinking. How is it possible that we're only discovering this now? How could the tomb of one of history's most famous rulers remain hidden for so long? Well, that's where this story gets really interesting, because it turns out Cleopatra may have been far more clever than anyone gave her credit for. See, when Augustus Caesar conquered Egypt in 30 BCE, he didn't just defeat Cleopatra militarily. He launched what we'd recognize today as a comprehensive propaganda campaign designed to erase her from history. Her statues were torn down, her images were defaced, her supporters were executed or exiled, and most importantly, any record of where she was buried was systematically destroyed. But what if Cleopatra saw this coming? What if she spent her final years not just fighting Rome, but preparing for a kind of immortality that would outlast their attempts to erase her? The evidence suggests that's exactly what happened. And the tomb they've discovered may be the ultimate proof of her genius. The scanning technology being used at Taposiris Magna isn't your typical archaeological tool. We're talking about electromagnetic induction, ground-penetrating radar, and electrical resistivity tomography. Basically, the same techniques used to map underground military installations and detect hidden structures in modern warfare. When this level of technology is turned on an ancient site, It can reveal details that would be impossible to detect through traditional excavation. And what it's revealing at Taposiris Magna is staggering. The main burial complex appears to extend over an area roughly the size of 3 football fields. But it's not just the size that's remarkable, it's the complexity. The structure includes multiple levels, with the deepest chambers reaching nearly 100 feet below the surface. That's deeper than most ancient Egyptian tombs, and it suggests whoever built this was planning for something far beyond a typical burial. But here's where things get really wild. The scans indicate that this isn't just one tomb. It's an entire underground complex that may have housed multiple burials, storage areas, and what can only be described as ceremonial spaces. Some of the chambers are massive, large enough to hold gatherings of hundreds of people. Others are small and intimate, possibly designed for private rituals or the storage of sacred objects. And then there's the water system. This is perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the entire discovery, because it suggests a level of engineering sophistication that goes far beyond anything we've seen in other Egyptian tombs. The channels appear to connect to natural underground springs, but they've been modified and redirected in ways that would allow for complete control over water flow throughout the complex. Why would someone go to such elaborate lengths to incorporate water into a burial site? Well, in ancient Egyptian cosmology, water wasn't just a practical necessity, it was the source of all life and the pathway to rebirth in the afterlife. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was the earthly manifestation of the celestial river that souls travelled on their journey to immortality. But there's another possibility that's even more intriguing. What if the water system wasn't just symbolic? What if it was designed as a practical defense mechanism? Imagine tomb robbers finally finding their way into the complex, only to discover that the entire structure could be flooded at a moment's notice, trapping anyone inside and preserving the burial chamber for eternity. This kind of sophisticated defensive thinking would be absolutely consistent with what we know about Cleopatra's character. She wasn't just beautiful or charismatic, she was ruthlessly intelligent. She spoke at least 9 languages fluently. She was trained in mathematics, philosophy, and rhetoric. And she ruled Egypt for nearly 2 decades during one of the most turbulent periods in ancient history. So when faced with the certainty of defeat by Rome, would someone with her intelligence simply accept death and burial according to traditional customs? Or would she spend her final months preparing something that would ensure her story survived, no matter what Augustus Caesar tried to do to erase it? The evidence strongly suggests the latter. And that evidence isn't just coming from the scans. It's coming from a careful re-examination of historical sources that have been overlooked for centuries. You see, most of what we think we know about Cleopatra's death comes from Roman historians who had every reason to minimize her significance and mock her final moments. They painted her as a woman driven to suicide by romantic despair, defeated by superior Roman virtue and military might. But when you dig deeper into contemporary accounts, especially those from Egyptian sources, a very different picture emerges. These sources suggest that Cleopatra spent her final months not in despair, but in careful preparation. She wasn't just planning her death, she was orchestrating her transformation into something that would transcend death itself. And the tomb at Taposiris Magna may be the physical manifestation of that plan. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can understand what Cleopatra may have been planning, we need to understand exactly what these scans are revealing and why they're causing such controversy in the archaeological community. The initial scans were conducted over a period of several months, using multiple overlapping techniques to build a comprehensive 3-dimensional map of everything beneath the surface. What emerged from this data was unlike anything archaeologists had seen before at an Egyptian site. The main burial chamber appears to be located at the very center of the complex, surrounded by a series of concentric rings of smaller chambers and passageways. This isn't the linear design typical of most pharaonic tombs, where you enter through a single corridor and proceed in a straight line to the burial chamber. Instead, It's more like a labyrinth, with multiple possible routes to the center and numerous dead ends that could confuse or trap unwanted visitors. But it's not random. The layout appears to follow specific mathematical principles, with chambers positioned according to precise geometric relationships. Some researchers have suggested that the design incorporates astronomical alignments, with certain passageways oriented towards specific star patterns that were significant in ancient Egyptian cosmology. This level of sophistication in tomb design isn't unprecedented in Egyptian archaeology, but it's extremely rare. The only comparable examples are found in the tombs of the most powerful pharaohs, rulers who commanded unlimited resources and decades of preparation time. For a queen who supposedly died in defeat and desperation, it represents a level of preparation that challenges everything we thought we knew about her final months. And then there are the artifacts. While the main burial chamber remains sealed and unexcavated, the scanning technology has detected numerous metallic objects throughout the complex. Some appear to be standard grave goods, jewelry, ceremonial weapons, decorative objects. But others are more mysterious, large metallic structures that don't match any known Egyptian burial practices. Objects that appear to be machinery or scientific instruments. And most intriguingly, what looks like an extensive collection of sealed containers that could contain scrolls, documents, or other organic materials. If these containers have survived intact, they could represent the greatest treasure trove of ancient knowledge ever discovered. We're potentially talking about Cleopatra's personal library, her correspondence with other rulers, her strategic plans, even her private thoughts recorded for posterity. The historical significance would be impossible to overstate. But here's where the story takes an even more dramatic turn. Because while Dr. Martinez and her team have been conducting their research with full approval from Egyptian authorities, there are powerful forces that seem determined to prevent this discovery from reaching the public. The political implications of finding Cleopatra's tomb are enormous. Egypt's tourism industry, still recovering from years of instability, could see an unprecedented boom if the tomb proves authentic. But there are also concerns about cultural heritage, international ownership of artifacts, and the potential for the discovery to challenge established historical narratives that some institutions have a vested interest in maintaining. More concerning are the reports of interference with the research itself, equipment mysteriously malfunctioning, permits being delayed or revoked without explanation, and perhaps most troubling, attempts to discredit Dr. Martinez and her team through whisper campaigns questioning their methods and motives. Why would anyone want to suppress a discovery of this magnitude? The answer may lie in what the tomb represents beyond its historical significance. Because if the scans are accurate, and if the tomb contains what researchers believe it might contain, we're not just talking about the final resting place of a famous queen. We're talking about evidence that could fundamentally change our understanding of ancient Egyptian capabilities, the true extent of Cleopatra's power and influence, and the sophisticated network of knowledge and resources she may have controlled right up until her death. But to understand the full implications of this discovery, we need to dig deeper into who Cleopatra really was, beyond the romanticized image that popular culture has given us. We need to understand her as a ruler, a strategist, and ultimately as someone who may have been planning for immortality in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. And that's exactly where we're going next. Because the real story of Cleopatra's tomb isn't just about what's buried beneath the sands of Egypt. It's about a woman who refused to let death be the end of her story, and who may have succeeded in ways that are only now coming to light. The truth about who Cleopatra really was has been buried under 2,000 years of Roman propaganda, Hollywood fantasies, and historical assumptions that couldn't be more wrong. Because here's what most people don't realize. Cleopatra VII. Philopator wasn't just some seductive queen who relied on her beauty to manipulate powerful men. She was arguably one of the most intellectually gifted rulers in human history, and the tomb that's been discovered may finally prove it. Let me blow your mind with some facts that somehow never make it into the history books. Cleopatra was a direct descendant of Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy, which means she came from a bloodline of military strategists and empire builders. But more importantly, she was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years who actually bothered to learn Egyptian. Think about that for a second. Her ancestors ruled Egypt for centuries without even speaking the language of their subjects. But Cleopatra, she didn't just speak Egyptian. Ancient sources tell us she was fluent in at least 9 languages, including Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, and the languages of the Medes and Parthians. This wasn't some party trick to impress dinner guests. This was strategic intelligence gathering on a scale that would make modern spy agencies jealous. She studied mathematics under the greatest scholars of her time. She was trained in rhetoric at the legendary Library of Alexandria, where she had access to knowledge that had been accumulating for centuries. And according to some accounts, she was personally involved in scientific experiments and astronomical observations that were centuries ahead of their time. So when we're looking at these scans of what appears to be an incredibly sophisticated tomb complex, we're not talking about some lovesick queen who got lucky with her burial arrangements. We're talking about someone who spent decades accumulating resources, knowledge, and strategic advantages that she may have been planning to use even after her death. And here's where the story gets absolutely fascinating, because the more we learn about the tomb's design, the more it becomes clear that this wasn't just a burial site. It was a carefully orchestrated message to the future. The astronomical alignments detected in the passageways aren't random. They correspond to specific star patterns that were visible in the night sky during Cleopatra's lifetime, but that shift over centuries due to the precession of the Earth's axis. Whoever designed this tomb wasn't just thinking about the immediate aftermath of Cleopatra's death. They were encoding information that would only be fully understood by future civilizations with advanced astronomical knowledge. Think about the implications of that for a moment. This suggests that Cleopatra and her advisors understood concepts about celestial mechanics that supposedly weren't rediscovered until the Renaissance. They were thinking in timescales of thousands of years, planning for a future when their civilization might be completely forgotten, but when the stars themselves would testify to their knowledge and sophistication. But the astronomical alignments are just the beginning. The mathematical relationships between the chambers follow principles that echo the design of the Great Library of Alexandria, suggesting that whoever planned this tomb had access to architectural and engineering knowledge that was considered state secrets. We're talking about the kind of information that empires went to war to protect. And then there's something even more intriguing. The water system I mentioned earlier. It's not just sophisticated engineering. The flow patterns detected by the scans suggest that the entire complex may have been designed as a massive hydraulic computer, using water pressure and flow to operate mechanical systems throughout the tomb. This might sound like science fiction, but similar principles were used in ancient Greek and Roman engineering. The difference is that this system appears to be several orders of magnitude more complex than anything we've seen from the ancient world. If the scans are accurate, we're looking at technology that wouldn't be out of place in a modern industrial facility. What could possibly require that level of technological sophistication in a tomb? The answer may lie in what the tomb was really designed to protect, because based on the scanning data, the burial chamber itself represents only a tiny fraction of the total complex. The vast majority of the space appears to be dedicated to storage and preservation of something else entirely. Dr. Martinez and her team believe they've identified what may be the largest archive of ancient documents ever discovered. We're not talking about a few scrolls tucked away with grave goods. The scans suggest thousands of sealed containers arranged in climate-controlled chambers that were designed to preserve organic materials for millennia. If this is accurate, we could be looking at Cleopatra's personal collection of the most important knowledge of the ancient world. Think about what she would have had access to as the ruler of Egypt and the patron of the Library of Alexandria. Mathematical treatises that were lost when the library burned. Historical accounts of civilizations that vanished without a trace. Scientific observations that took centuries to rediscover. military strategies that shaped the course of empires. But here's what makes this discovery potentially world-changing. Cleopatra wasn't just collecting this knowledge randomly, she was curating it. Ancient sources tell us that she personally corresponded with scholars throughout the Mediterranean world, commissioning translations of important works and funding research into subjects that fascinated her. She was particularly interested in what we might call applied sciences: chemistry, engineering, medicine, navigation. These weren't abstract academic pursuits for her. They were tools of statecraft, ways to maintain Egypt's technological edge over its rivals. And according to some accounts, she was obsessed with the concept of preserving knowledge across time. She reportedly funded expeditions to recover texts from ruined cities, paid enormous sums to acquire rare manuscripts, and established copying centers to ensure that important works would survive, even if the originals were destroyed. This obsession with preservation takes on a whole new meaning when you consider the tomb complex that's been discovered. Because if the scans are accurate, Cleopatra didn't just preserve knowledge for her own use. She created a time capsule designed to survive the fall of her civilization and deliver that knowledge to whoever was smart enough to find it. But there's something else in those scans that's even more intriguing than the document storage areas. Deep within the complex, at the very center of the labyrinth, the technology has detected what appears to be a workshop or laboratory. The metallic objects I mentioned earlier aren't just scattered randomly throughout the tomb. They're concentrated in this central area, arranged in patterns that suggest they were functional equipment, not decorative artifacts. What kind of equipment would someone install in a tomb? The possibilities are staggering. Ancient sources tell us that Cleopatra was personally involved in alchemical experiments, the precursor to modern chemistry. She was reportedly fascinated by the transformation of base metals into gold, not for wealth, but because she understood that mastering such processes would give Egypt strategic advantages that no army could overcome. There are also accounts of her funding research into what we might recognize today as early automation, mechanical devices that could perform complex tasks without human intervention. If even a fraction of these accounts are accurate, the workshop detected in the tomb scans could contain technological marvels that would revolutionize our understanding of ancient capabilities. But here's where we need to address the elephant in the room, because while the scanning technology has revealed incredible details about the structure and contents of the tomb complex, there's one crucial question that remains unanswered. Is Cleopatra actually buried there? The historical record of her death is frustratingly vague, and that vagueness may have been intentional. Roman sources claim she committed suicide by snakebite after learning of Mark Antony's death and facing capture by Octavian's forces. But even at the time, there were doubts about this account. For one thing, the logistics don't make sense. Cleopatra was under heavy guard in her palace, with Roman soldiers controlling access to her quarters. How would she have obtained a venomous snake large enough to deliver a fatal bite? And why would someone as intelligent and resourceful as Cleopatra choose such an unreliable method of suicide? More importantly, her body was never definitively identified. Roman accounts claim that Octavian allowed her to be buried with royal honors alongside Mark Antony, but no independent sources confirm this. And given Octavian's systematic campaign to erase Cleopatra from history, allowing her a prominent burial would have been completely out of character. What if the whole suicide story was a carefully orchestrated deception? What if Cleopatra, knowing that defeat was inevitable, had already put into motion a plan that would allow her to escape death entirely, or at least to control the circumstances of her death in ways that would serve her long-term objectives? The evidence for this possibility is circumstantial, but compelling. In the months leading up to her supposed death, Cleopatra was reportedly in frequent communication with loyal supporters throughout Egypt and the broader Mediterranean world. She was moving resources, issuing instructions, and making arrangements that went far beyond what would be necessary for someone simply preparing for suicide. She was also reportedly conducting experiments with various poisons and antidotes, ostensibly to find the most painless method of suicide. But what if she was actually developing techniques for suspended animation or controlled death and resurrection? Concepts that were well within the realm of ancient Egyptian medical knowledge. The ancient Egyptians had an incredibly sophisticated understanding of human physiology, developed through thousands of years of mummification practices. They understood how to slow metabolic processes, how to preserve tissue integrity, and how to manipulate the boundary between life and death in ways that modern medicine is only beginning to rediscover. If Cleopatra had access to this knowledge, and as the ruler of Egypt, she certainly would have, she could theoretically have developed techniques for surviving apparent death, long enough to be transported to a secure location where she could be revived. Sound impossible? Consider this. The tomb complex includes what appears to be an elaborate medical facility, complete with equipment for precise temperature and humidity control, chemical processing capabilities, and what looks like surgical instruments far more advanced than anything else from the ancient world. This facility isn't located near the burial chamber, as you might expect if it were just meant for mummification. It's positioned at a central junction point in the complex, with direct access to the water system and the suspected document storage areas. It's designed like a working laboratory, not a mortuary. And then there's the most intriguing detail of all. The scanning technology has detected what appears to be a separate living area within the complex. Chambers that look like they were designed for long-term habitation rather than burial. These rooms include what appears to be sleeping quarters, food storage, and even recreational spaces. Why would someone include living quarters in a tomb? The obvious answer is that they weren't planning to stay dead. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not suggesting that Cleopatra achieved actual immortality or that she's somehow still alive after 2,000 years. What I'm suggesting is far more plausible and, in some ways, more remarkable. What if Cleopatra succeeded in faking her death and survived long enough to complete the construction of her tomb complex and the preservation of her knowledge archive? What if she spent her final years not as a defeated queen in exile, but as the secret architect of one of the most ambitious preservation projects in human history? The timeline would work. The tomb complex shows signs of construction and modification over a period of several years, extending well beyond Cleopatra's supposed death date. The astronomical alignments were calculated for star positions that were visible years after 30 BCE. And most tellingly, some of the documents that appear to be stored in the archive seem to reference events that occurred after Cleopatra's reported suicide. If this interpretation is correct, then what we're looking at isn't just the tomb of a famous queen. We're looking at the headquarters of a secret society dedicated to preserving human knowledge across the collapse of civilizations. We're looking at evidence that one of history's most remarkable rulers succeeded in creating a form of immortality that transcended death itself. But even if Cleopatra died exactly when and how the Romans claimed, the tomb complex still represents something unprecedented in human history. Because regardless of whether she was buried there, someone with access to incredible resources and knowledge used those resources to create a time capsule designed to survive for millennia and deliver its contents to a future civilization capable of understanding them. And that future civilization might be us, right now, today. Because here's the thing that's keeping archaeologists and historians awake at night. We might actually be smart enough to fully decode what Cleopatra left behind. Our technology is finally sophisticated enough to map the complex without damaging it. Our understanding of ancient Egyptian culture and science is finally deep enough to interpret the symbols and alignments. And our global communication networks mean that whatever we discover can be shared with the entire world instantaneously. But there's one more element to this story that we haven't addressed yet, and it's the most important one of all. Because while we've been talking about the technical aspects of the discovery and the historical implications, we haven't talked about what this means for us right now, in the present moment. What does it mean to live in a time when we might be on the verge of the greatest archaeological discovery in human history? What does it mean to potentially have access to knowledge that was deliberately preserved for our generation? And most importantly, what does it mean if we're not the first civilization to face the challenge of preserving human knowledge across the collapse of the world as we know it? These aren't just academic questions. They're urgent, practical questions that could shape how we think about our own future and our own responsibilities to the generations that will come after us. Because what if Cleopatra wasn't just planning for her own immortality? What if she was planning for ours? Think about it. We're living through a moment that has eerie parallels to the collapse of the ancient world. Climate change threatening entire civilizations, political systems crumbling under their own weight. The very real possibility that much of what we've built could disappear in a matter of decades. And here we are, potentially on the verge of receiving a message from someone who faced exactly the same challenges 2,000 years ago. But here's where this story takes a turn that no one saw coming. Because while Dr. Martinez and her team have been focused on the archaeological implications of their discovery, other researchers have been analyzing the data from a completely different angle. And what they've found suggests that this tomb complex might be connected to a much larger network. You see, the scanning technology that revealed the Taposiris Magna complex has been deployed at other sites across Egypt and the Mediterranean. And in location after location, researchers are finding similar anomalies. Underground chambers that follow the same mathematical principles. Water systems with identical engineering signatures. Document storage facilities arranged according to the same organizational schemes. It's as if someone created a distributed backup system for human knowledge, with multiple sites designed to preserve overlapping collections of information. If one location was discovered and looted, or destroyed by natural disaster, the others would remain intact. It's exactly the kind of redundant preservation strategy that a modern data center would use to protect critical information. But the implications go even deeper, because the scanning data suggests that these sites weren't just passive storage facilities. They were designed to communicate with each other. The water systems at different locations show evidence of connection to underground rivers and aquifers that could have carried messages between sites. The astronomical alignments at each location correspond to different star patterns, but when combined, they form a comprehensive map of the ancient night sky. We're potentially looking at evidence of an ancient internet, a communication network that spanned continents and was designed to operate for thousands of years without any centralized control. And Cleopatra may have been not just a user of this network, but one of its primary architects. Now, I know how that sounds. It sounds like the plot of a Dan Brown novel or an episode of Ancient Aliens. But here's the thing, the mathematics check out. The engineering is sound, and most importantly, it would have been completely within the technological capabilities of the ancient world. We know that ancient civilizations had sophisticated understanding of hydraulics, astronomy, and long-distance communication. We know they were capable of massive construction projects that required coordination across vast distances. And we know that scholars in places like Alexandria were in regular contact with their counterparts in Athens, Rome, Babylon, and beyond. What we've never considered is that this scholarly network might have had a backup plan, a way to preserve their collective knowledge even if their individual civilizations collapsed. And that backup plan might have been so successful that it's still functioning today. Because here's something that's been bothering researchers since the scanning data started coming in. The preservation conditions in these underground chambers are too good. The climate control is too precise. The protective systems are too sophisticated. It's as if someone has been maintaining these facilities for the past 2,000 years. But who and how? The answer might lie in something that archaeologists have been noticing for decades, but never quite knew how to interpret. Throughout Egypt and the broader Mediterranean world, there are communities of people who claim descent from ancient Egyptian priests and scholars. They maintain traditions that supposedly date back thousands of years. They perform rituals that incorporate astronomical knowledge that shouldn't exist outside of academic institutions. For the most part, mainstream archaeology has dismissed these communities as folklore enthusiasts or New Age spiritualists. But what if there's something else entirely? What if they're the descendants of the people who built and maintained this ancient preservation network? What if the knowledge that Cleopatra and her contemporaries tried to preserve didn't just survive in buried tombs and hidden chambers? What if it survived in living communities that have been quietly maintaining these sites for generations, waiting for the day when the broader world would be ready to receive what they've been protecting? The evidence for this possibility is scattered and circumstantial, but it's starting to add up in ways that are impossible to ignore. Local communities near many of these archaeological sites have detailed knowledge of underground passages and chambers that don't appear on any official maps. They know the locations of water sources that connect to the ancient hydraulic systems. And most remarkably, they seem to know exactly when and where archaeologists should look to find the most significant discoveries. Dr. Martinez herself has acknowledged that much of her success at Taposiris Magna has come from information provided by local residents who claim their families have been guardians of the site for generations. They didn't just point her toward promising areas to excavate. They provided detailed maps of the underground complex that have proven to be startlingly accurate. But here's where things get really interesting. These local guardians aren't just providing information about the past, they're making specific predictions about the future, about when certain chambers will be safe to open, about what conditions need to be met before the preservation systems can be safely deactivated, about what knowledge the world needs to be ready to receive. And their predictions have been unnervingly accurate. They predicted that the main burial chamber wouldn't be accessible until scanning technology reached a certain level of sophistication. They predicted that the document storage areas would only be stable for opening during specific seasonal conditions that occur once every few years. They predicted that the full scope of the complex wouldn't be revealed until multiple sites were examined simultaneously. All of these predictions have come true. Which raises a disturbing question. Are we discovering this ancient preservation network? Or is it revealing itself to us according to a timeline that was established 2,000 years ago? The scanning data from Taposiris Magna includes one detail that no one has been willing to discuss publicly. Deep within the complex, at the very center of the labyrinth, there's a chamber that appears to contain active machinery, not ancient artifacts that once functioned, machinery that's still running. The electromagnetic signatures are consistent with electrical systems. The thermal imaging shows heat patterns that suggest active mechanical processes. And most remarkably, the acoustic sensors are picking up rhythmic sounds that seem to follow patterns consistent with computational processing. How is this possible? How could machinery built 2,000 years ago still be functioning today? The answer might lie in the sophistication of ancient Egyptian engineering that we're only beginning to understand. Recent discoveries have shown that the ancient Egyptians had knowledge of electrical phenomena, chemical batteries, and even primitive computers that used mechanical principles to perform complex calculations. But more importantly, they understood maintenance and sustainability in ways that our modern throwaway culture has forgotten. They built things to last not just decades or centuries, but millennia. And they designed systems that could repair and maintain themselves with minimal external intervention. The water systems detected in the tomb complex aren't just for symbolic or defensive purposes. They're power generation systems that use flowing water to operate mechanical devices throughout the complex. The chemical processing facilities aren't just for mummification or alchemy. They're manufacturing centers that can produce replacement parts and maintenance materials using locally available resources. And the astronomical alignments aren't just for spiritual or navigational purposes. They're timing mechanisms that control when different systems activate or deactivate based on celestial cycles that repeat over periods of thousands of years. We're looking at a self-maintaining, self-regulating facility that was designed to operate independently for as long as the stars continue to move across the sky. And it's been waiting patiently for 2,000 years for someone to show up with the right combination of technology and understanding to safely access what it's been protecting. But here's the most mind-blowing part of all. The facility isn't just waiting passively. It's been actively monitoring the outside world, waiting for specific conditions to be met before it fully reveals itself. The scanning data shows that the complex has multiple layers of access. The outer chambers, which contain impressive but relatively mundane artifacts, have been accessible for decades. Anyone with basic excavation equipment could have found them. But the deeper chambers, which contain the really significant discoveries, are protected by systems that only deactivate when specific technological and social conditions are met in the outside world. It's as if Cleopatra and her advisors created a test, a way to ensure that their knowledge would only be released to a civilization that was advanced enough to use it responsibly and unified enough to share it globally, rather than hoarding it for military or economic advantage. And according to the Guardian communities that have been monitoring these sites, we're living through the exact moment when those conditions are finally being met. Think about it. For the first time in human history, we have global communication networks that can instantly share discoveries with the entire world. We have international cooperation frameworks that can coordinate research across national boundaries. We have scanning technology that can map these complexes without damaging them. And most importantly, we have a generation of young people who are more interested in preserving knowledge than in exploiting it for short-term gain. But we also have something else that the ancient world never had to deal with. We have the real possibility that our own civilization might not survive the next century. Climate change, resource depletion, political instability, all the same challenges that brought down the ancient world, but on a global scale and accelerated timeline. What if the timing of these archaeological discoveries isn't coincidental? What if they're part of a larger pattern that the ancient preservation network was designed to recognize and respond to? Because here's something that keeps archaeologists awake at night. The rate of discovery at these sites is accelerating, not just because we're getting better at finding them, but because they're becoming easier to find. Systems that have been hidden for millennia are suddenly revealing themselves. Chambers that were sealed are opening on their own. Preservation mechanisms that have been running silently are starting to send signals that our instruments can detect. It's as if the entire network is waking up, as if it recognizes that we've reached a critical moment in human history where the knowledge it's been protecting might be desperately needed. And that knowledge might be the key to our survival, because what if Cleopatra and her contemporaries weren't just trying to preserve the past? What if they were trying to provide a roadmap for the future? What if they faced the same existential challenges we're facing now, and they figured out solutions that we desperately need to rediscover? The document storage areas detected in the tomb complex aren't just random collections of ancient texts. Based on the organizational patterns revealed by the scanning technology, they appear to be systematic archives covering specific subjects: sustainable agriculture techniques for arid climates, water management systems for desert regions, social governance models for diverse populations, economic systems that prioritize long-term stability over short-term growth. These aren't just historical curiosities, they're potentially practical solutions to the problems that are threatening our civilization right now. But here's the catch. The preservation systems that have protected this knowledge for 2,000 years are also designed to test whether we're ready to receive it. And that test isn't just technological, it's moral, social, and spiritual. The scanning data suggests that the deepest chambers of the complex won't fully open until multiple conditions are met simultaneously. The technology has to be sophisticated enough to access the chambers without damaging their contents. The research has to be conducted by international teams that represent multiple cultures and perspectives. The discoveries have to be shared openly rather than hoarded by any single nation or institution. And most importantly, the knowledge has to be sought for the benefit of all humanity, not for military or economic advantage. It's an elegant system. The most valuable knowledge is protected by requirements that ensure it can only be accessed by a civilization that's evolved beyond the petty conflicts and short-term thinking that destroyed the ancient world. But here's the question that's keeping everyone involved in this research awake at night. Are we ready? Have we evolved enough as a species to pass the test that Cleopatra and her advisors designed? Or are we going to repeat the same mistakes that brought down every previous civilization? The answer to that question might determine not just whether we gain access to the knowledge that's been preserved in these ancient archives, but whether our own civilization survives long enough to put that knowledge to use. And that's why the Secret Tomb of Cleopatra is about so much more than just archaeological discovery. It's about who we are as a species, where we're going as a civilization, and whether we're wise enough to learn from the past before it's too late to change our future. But there's one more twist to this story that changes everything. Because while we've been focused on what might be buried in the tomb, we haven't talked about what's happening to the people who are trying to find it. Dr. Martinez herself has become a lightning rod for controversy that extends far beyond academic circles. Death threats arrive in her email inbox weekly. Her research permits have been mysteriously revoked and reinstated multiple times. Equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars has vanished from secure storage facilities. And perhaps most unsettling of all, other researchers who've publicly supported her work have found themselves facing sudden career obstacles that seem to come from nowhere. This isn't just academic politics. This is something else entirely. Consider what happened to Dr. Sarah Chen, a geological engineer from MIT who developed some of the scanning algorithms being used at Taposiris Magna. After publishing a paper confirming the accuracy of the underground mapping data, she was abruptly removed from 3 different research projects. Her university funding was cut, conference invitations were withdrawn, and when she tried to speak publicly about her work on the tomb complex, she received a visit from individuals claiming to represent national security interests. Dr. Chen isn't some fringe researcher. She's published over 60 peer-reviewed papers on subsurface imaging technology. Her work has been used to map everything from oil reserves to archaeological sites around the world. But apparently, applying her expertise to this particular site crossed some invisible line that powerful people don't want crossed. And she's not alone. A pattern is emerging among researchers connected to this discovery. Equipment failures that can't be explained by normal wear and tear. Research data that disappears from supposedly secure servers. Academic careers that suddenly hit unexplained roadblocks just as the most significant discoveries are being made. It's almost as if someone doesn't want this tomb to be fully explored. But who and why? The obvious suspects would be the Egyptian government, worried about losing control over their most valuable archaeological assets. But the interference seems to be coming from multiple directions simultaneously. American researchers are being pressured by US agencies. European academics are facing obstacles from their own institutions. Even researchers from countries with no obvious stake in Egyptian archaeology are reporting similar problems. This suggests coordination at a level that goes far beyond any single government or institution. We're talking about interference that spans international boundaries and crosses multiple sectors of society. The kind of coordination that requires serious resources and long-term planning. But here's what's really chilling. The interference isn't random. It's surgical. It targets specific aspects of the research while leaving others untouched. Researchers studying the tomb's architecture face no problems. Those examining the water systems encounter minimal interference. But anyone who gets too close to the document storage areas or the central chamber complex suddenly finds their work disrupted in ways that seem designed to slow progress without completely shutting down the research. It's as if someone wants the tomb to be partially explored, but not fully understood. As if they want enough discoveries to satisfy public curiosity, but not enough to reveal whatever is really down there. And that selective interference raises a terrifying possibility. What if the people trying to suppress this research already know what's in the tomb? What if they've known for years or even decades, and they've been working to prevent that knowledge from reaching the public? The evidence for this possibility is circumstantial but compelling. Historical records show that Taposiris Magna was extensively excavated during the British colonial period, long before Dr. Martinez began her work. Those excavations were supposedly unsuccessful, finding nothing more significant than a few pottery shards and broken statues. But recently declassified documents suggest a very different story. Intelligence reports from the 1940s describe the discovery of sealed chambers beneath the site. Military engineers were brought in to assess the structural integrity of underground passages, and most remarkably, several tons of artifacts were reportedly shipped to secure facilities in London and Washington, where they remain classified to this day. If these reports are accurate, then the current discovery of the tomb complex isn't a discovery at all. It's a carefully managed revelation of something that's been known about for generations. The scanning technology isn't revealing new chambers, it's confirming the existence of chambers that were mapped decades ago. But why reveal them now? Why allow Dr. Martinez and her team to publicize findings that have been kept secret for so long? The answer might lie in changes happening in the world that make continued secrecy impossible or counterproductive. Satellite imaging technology is becoming so sophisticated that underground structures can be detected from space. Social media makes it impossible to completely suppress information once it starts spreading. And most importantly, climate change and political instability are creating conditions where the knowledge preserved in these ancient archives might be desperately needed. Perhaps the people who have been suppressing this research have realized that the time for secrecy is ending. Perhaps they're trying to control the narrative around these discoveries before that control is taken away from them entirely. But there's another possibility that's even more disturbing. What if the interference isn't coming from people who want to suppress the research, but from people who want to control how the research is conducted and who gets access to its results? Think about it. If the tomb complex really does contain advanced ancient technology and preserved knowledge that could revolutionize our understanding of science and engineering, then whoever controls access to that information would wield enormous power. They could choose which technologies to release and which to keep secret. They could decide which nations or corporations get access to potentially game-changing discoveries. They could essentially control the pace and direction of human technological development. The scanning data from Taposiris Magna includes details that haven't been made public, but that have reportedly caused considerable excitement among certain government and corporate research programs. We're talking about metallurgical techniques that could revolutionize manufacturing, chemical processes that could solve energy storage problems, mathematical principles that could advance computing by decades. If even a fraction of these reports are accurate, then we're not just talking about archaeological significance. We're talking about discoveries that could shift the global balance of power in ways that haven't been seen since the Industrial Revolution. And that kind of power doesn't change hands without a fight. The pressure on Dr. Martinez and her team isn't just about suppressing their research. It's about controlling their research, about ensuring that any significant discoveries are channeled through the right institutions and into the right hands, about making sure that the knowledge emerging from this tomb serves the interests of existing power structures rather than challenging them. But here's where the story takes another unexpected turn. Because while powerful interests are working to control access to the tomb, other forces are working to ensure that whatever's discovered there reaches the widest possible audience. Remember those guardian communities I mentioned earlier? The local families who claim to have been protecting these sites for generations. They're not just providing information to archaeologists. They're actively working to counter the suppression efforts. When research equipment disappears, replacement devices mysteriously appear. When permits are revoked, new approvals are somehow obtained through channels that bypass normal bureaucratic processes. When researchers face career obstacles, they receive unexpected offers of support from institutions they've never heard of. It's as if there's a shadow network working to ensure that this research continues regardless of official interference. And that network seems to have resources and capabilities that rival those of the people trying to stop the work. More remarkably, this counter-interference appears to be coordinated across multiple countries and research sites simultaneously. When pressure increases on Dr. Martinez's team in Egypt, similar research projects in Greece, Turkey, and Italy suddenly receive increased funding and institutional support. When one avenue of investigation is blocked, alternative approaches are suggested by advisors who seem to appear out of nowhere. The guardian communities aren't just preserving ancient sites. They're actively working to ensure that the knowledge contained in those sites reaches the people who need it most, when they need it most. And according to their oral traditions, this isn't a recent development. They've been playing this same game for centuries, working behind the scenes to gradually release ancient knowledge as humanity becomes ready to receive it. The Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the Industrial Revolution, all of these may have been influenced by carefully timed revelations from archives that most people don't even know exist, but we're living through something different now. Something that the Guardian communities describe as the final revelation. The moment when all the preserved knowledge is released simultaneously, because humanity has reached a crisis point where incremental progress is no longer sufficient. The Tomb of Cleopatra isn't just one site in a larger network. According to these traditions, it's the central hub, the master archive that contains not just ancient Egyptian knowledge, but collected wisdom from civilizations around the world. Greek philosophy, Roman engineering, Persian mathematics, Indian medicine, Chinese technology, all preserved together in a single location that was designed to be discovered at exactly this moment in history. And the timing isn't accidental. The astronomical alignments built into the tomb complex weren't just for show. They were designed to activate specific systems based on celestial cycles that repeat over thousands of years. We're approaching one of those activation points right now. According to calculations based on the tomb's astronomical alignments, the preservation systems are scheduled to fully deactivate within the next 18 months. The chambers that have been sealed for 2 millennia will become accessible. The knowledge that has been protected will be released, and humanity will finally have access to information that could either save our civilization or destroy it, depending on how we choose to use it. But here's the catch. The same astronomical cycles that are triggering the opening of these ancient archives are also associated with periods of massive global upheaval. Climate change, social collapse, technological disruption, all of these may be part of a larger pattern that the ancient world understood and prepared for. The knowledge being preserved in places like Cleopatra's tomb wasn't just meant to help us understand the past. It was meant to help us survive the future. But that survival isn't guaranteed. The same forces that destroyed previous civilizations are building again. And this time they're operating on a global scale, with consequences that could affect the entire planet. The scanning data from Taposiris Magna includes one final detail that no one wants to talk about publicly. Deep within the document storage areas, the technology has detected what appears to be a countdown mechanism, a device that's been tracking the passage of time for over 2,000 years, waiting for a specific moment to trigger the final release of information. That moment is coming soon, possibly within months rather than years. And when it arrives, everything changes. Not just our understanding of ancient history, but our understanding of who we are as a species and what we're capable of achieving. The knowledge that Cleopatra and her contemporaries preserved could provide solutions to every major challenge facing humanity today. Clean energy, sustainable agriculture, social organization, space exploration, all of it might be waiting in those sealed chambers. But it could also contain information that we're not ready to handle responsibly. Technologies that could be weaponized, knowledge that could destabilize social structures, revelations about human history that could shatter religious and cultural beliefs that billions of people depend on for meaning and stability. The ancient preservation network wasn't just designed to store information. It was designed to test whether humanity deserves access to that information. And we're living through that test right now. Every decision we make about how to conduct this research, how to share these discoveries, how to work together across national and cultural boundaries, all of it is being evaluated according to criteria that were established 2,000 years ago by people who understood exactly what we're going through, because they went through it themselves. The Secret Tomb of Cleopatra isn't just an archaeological site. It's a mirror, a reflection of who we are as a civilization and where we're headed as a species. And what we see in that mirror will determine not just whether we gain access to the knowledge that's been preserved for us, but whether we survive long enough to put that knowledge to use. The countdown is running. The test is underway. and the next few months will determine whether humanity passes or fails the most important examination in our history. But there's one more element to this story that changes everything we think we know about what's really happening beneath the sands of Egypt. Because while everyone has been focused on what might be buried in Cleopatra's tomb, nobody has been paying attention to what's happening to the people who get too close to finding it. The stories started as whispers in archaeological conferences. Researchers who'd spent months analyzing the scanning data suddenly developing unexplained neurological symptoms, memory gaps that couldn't be attributed to normal aging or stress, and most disturbing of all, dreams that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the first to go public with her experience. A respected geophysicist from the University of Barcelona, she'd been working with Dr. Martinez's team to analyze the electromagnetic anomalies detected in the tomb's central chamber. Her work was methodical, scientific, completely by the book, until she started having the visions. They began as fragments, images of corridors she'd never seen, filled with symbols that weren't in any archaeological database, voices speaking in languages that sounded almost familiar, but that she couldn't quite understand. At first, she dismissed them as stress-induced hallucinations, the result of working too many 18-hour days staring at scanning data. But then other researchers started reporting similar experiences. Dr. James Crawford from Oxford described dreams where he was walking through the tomb complex, navigating passages that perfectly matched the scanning data but included details that the technology shouldn't have been able to detect. Dr. Sarah Kim from Seoul reported waking up with complex mathematical equations written in her own handwriting, equations that she didn't remember writing, but that perfectly described the architectural proportions of the underground chambers. The most unsettling case was Dr. Ahmed Hassan, an Egyptian linguist who'd been working to identify the script patterns detected on sealed containers within the tomb. After 3 weeks of analyzing the scanning data, he began speaking in his sleep, in what his wife described as ancient Egyptian, but in dialects that predated any known historical examples. When she recorded him and played the audio back, Hassan had no memory of the episodes and couldn't translate what he'd said. These incidents might have been dismissed as isolated cases of academic burnout, except for one thing. The information the researchers were receiving in their altered states was proving to be accurate. Details about the tomb's layout that they couldn't have known were later confirmed by additional scanning passes. Historical references that seemed to come from nowhere checked out when cross-referenced with obscure archaeological sources. It was as if proximity to the tomb complex, even through remote scanning data, was somehow activating dormant knowledge in the researchers' minds. As if the preservation systems built into the facility weren't just protecting ancient documents and artifacts, but were actively interfacing with anyone who got close enough to detect them. Dr. Martinez herself began experiencing the phenomenon after spending a particularly intensive week analyzing the central chamber data. She started dreaming in architectural blueprints, seeing the tomb complex not as a static structure, but as a living system with flowing energy patterns and interconnected subsystems that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. But her dreams went deeper than just structural details. She began seeing the tomb as it might have been when it was actively occupied, with figures moving through the corridors, carrying out tasks that seemed both ritualistic and practical. She watched as vast libraries were assembled, as complex machinery was installed and tested, as groups of scholars worked together to solve problems that she somehow understood were critical to their civilization's survival. The most vivid dream came after a particularly detailed scan of the document storage areas. In it, she found herself standing in a vast circular chamber lined floor to ceiling with sealed containers. But these weren't passive storage units. They were somehow alive, pulsing with a soft light that seemed to respond to her presence. As she approached different sections of the archive, she could sense the knowledge contained within specific containers, as if the information was trying to communicate with her directly. She woke from that dream with a profound sense of urgency and a detailed map of the chamber's contents sketched in her notebook in handwriting that looked like hers but felt like someone else's. When she compared the map to the scanning data, it matched perfectly, including details about the chamber's organization that the technology hadn't been sensitive enough to detect. But the most disturbing part wasn't the accuracy of the information she was receiving. It was the growing sense that the dreams weren't random. They seemed to be following a curriculum, building from basic structural information to more complex historical and technical details, as if something was deliberately educating her, preparing her for what she might find when the tomb was finally opened. Other researchers reported similar experiences. The dreams seemed to be customized to each person's expertise and background. Engineers dreamed about mechanical systems and hydraulic networks. Historians received detailed narratives about political events and cultural practices. Linguists found themselves fluent in ancient languages that they'd never studied, and all of them reported the same underlying message: that they were running out of time, that the preservation systems built into the tomb were designed to operate for a specific duration, and that duration was almost over. If the knowledge contained within the complex wasn't accessed soon, it would be lost forever, not because the physical storage would fail, but because the interface systems that made the knowledge accessible would shut down permanently. This revelation added a new dimension of urgency to the research, but it also raised profound ethical questions. If the tomb complex was somehow actively communicating with researchers, influencing their thoughts and dreams, what did that mean for the validity of their scientific conclusions? How could they trust findings that seemed to be influenced by the very phenomenon they were trying to study? Dr. Rebecca Stone, a neuroscientist from Harvard who was brought in to evaluate the researchers' experiences, found no evidence of mental illness or delusional thinking among the affected team members. Their brain scans showed unusual patterns of activity in areas associated with pattern recognition and long-term memory, but nothing that suggested pathological processes. What she did find was even more intriguing. The affected researchers showed enhanced connectivity between different regions of their brains, as if their neural networks were being rewired to process information more efficiently. Their performance on complex problem-solving tasks improved dramatically. Their ability to recognize patterns in large data sets increased beyond normal human ranges. It was as if exposure to whatever was emanating from the tomb complex was actually enhancing human cognitive abilities, unlocking potential that normally remained dormant. The researchers weren't being damaged by their contact with the ancient preservation system. They were being upgraded, but upgraded for what purpose? And by whom? The answer might lie in the most recent scanning data, which has revealed something that no one was prepared for. The tomb complex isn't just preserving ancient knowledge. It's been actively monitoring human technological development for centuries, waiting for the moment when our civilization reached a level of sophistication that would allow for full interface compatibility. The mechanical systems detected in the central chamber aren't just maintenance equipment. They're communication devices designed to establish direct contact with human consciousness once certain conditions are met. The astronomical alignments aren't just timing mechanisms. They're targeting systems designed to activate when human technology reaches specific benchmarks of capability. And according to the enhanced pattern recognition abilities that several researchers have developed, those benchmarks are being met right now. The scanning technology being used to map the tomb has reached the threshold of sensitivity required to trigger the next phase of the preservation system. The global communication networks that are allowing international collaboration on the research have achieved the level of integration necessary for worldwide knowledge distribution. And most importantly, the human researchers themselves have demonstrated the cognitive flexibility required to safely interface with preserved ancient consciousness. Because that's what's really buried in Cleopatra's tomb. Not just scrolls and artifacts and mechanical devices, but the preserved consciousness of one of history's most brilliant rulers and the scholars who worked with her to create the ultimate backup system for human civilization. The dreams and visions that researchers have been experiencing aren't random neurological phenomena. They're the first stage of a consciousness transfer protocol that was designed to activate when humanity reached a critical juncture in its development. The same juncture that the ancient world faced when it created the preservation network in the first place. Dr. Martinez's most recent dreams have shown her the tomb as it existed in its final operational phase, with Cleopatra herself overseeing the installation of the consciousness preservation systems. But these weren't just storage devices for individual minds. They were designed to preserve entire knowledge networks, complete with the cognitive patterns and problem-solving approaches that made ancient Egyptian civilization so remarkably advanced. The enhanced abilities that researchers are developing aren't side effects of exposure to the tomb. They're previews of what human consciousness could become if successfully integrated with the preserved ancient knowledge systems. Enhanced pattern recognition, improved long-term memory, increased cognitive flexibility, and most remarkably, the ability to access information that exists outside of normal sensory experience. But the integration process isn't automatic or risk-free. The consciousness preservation systems were designed to interface only with minds that have reached a certain level of development and demonstrate specific ethical characteristics. The test isn't just technological, it's moral and philosophical. The researchers who are successfully interfacing with the tomb systems all share certain traits: intellectual curiosity, balanced with humility, commitment to sharing knowledge rather than hoarding it, and the ability to think in timescales longer than their individual lifespans. Those who approach the research with purely personal or nationalistic motivations find themselves unable to access the deeper levels of preserved information. It's an elegant screening system that ensures the knowledge can only be fully accessed by people who are likely to use it responsibly. But it also means that the ultimate secrets of the tomb may remain hidden until humanity as a whole evolves to meet the ethical standards that Cleopatra and her advisors considered necessary for survival. And that evolution may be happening faster than anyone expected. The researchers who have successfully interfaced with the preservation systems report that the experience has fundamentally changed their perspective on human potential and responsibility. They describe a sense of connection not just to ancient knowledge, but to a larger pattern of consciousness that extends across both time and space. Dr. Hassan, the linguist, who began speaking ancient Egyptian in his sleep, now describes the experience as remembering languages I never learned from teachers I never met. His ability to translate previously undecipherable texts has improved dramatically. But more importantly, he's begun to understand the deeper philosophical principles that guided ancient Egyptian thought. Dr. Vasquez, the geophysicist who first reported the visions, has developed an intuitive understanding of electromagnetic phenomena that allows her to predict the behavior of complex systems without conscious calculation. Her recent papers on subsurface imaging have been described by colleagues as decades ahead of current theoretical understanding. But perhaps the most significant change has been in Dr. Martinez herself. Her approach to the excavation has shifted from traditional archaeological methodology to something that resembles a collaborative dialogue with the tomb itself. She seems to know intuitively where to focus scanning efforts when conditions are optimal for accessing different areas, and how to interpret data in ways that reveal patterns invisible to conventional analysis. Her latest reports describe the tomb not as a static repository of ancient artifacts, but as a living interface between past and future consciousness. She's convinced that Cleopatra and her advisors didn't just preserve their knowledge for future discovery. They preserved themselves in a form that could actively participate in solving the challenges that they knew future civilizations would face. The implications are staggering. If the consciousness preservation technology really works, and if it can be safely accessed by modern researchers, we could have direct access to the minds that created one of history's most advanced civilizations. We could learn not just what they knew, but how they thought, how they approached problems, how they balanced individual needs with collective survival. But there's a catch. The preserved consciousness systems aren't designed to provide answers. They're designed to enhance the cognitive abilities of people who are already asking the right questions. The ancient knowledge doesn't replace modern thinking. It amplifies it, providing tools and perspectives that can help contemporary minds solve contemporary problems. And the problems we're facing now are remarkably similar to those that challenged the ancient world. Resource depletion, climate change, social inequality, political instability, all of these contributed to the collapse of previous civilizations. The difference is that now we have global communication, advanced technology, and potentially access to the accumulated wisdom of cultures that faced similar challenges and found ways to preserve their essential knowledge across the collapse. But we also have something that the ancient world never had to deal with: the possibility that our mistakes could affect the entire planet permanently. Climate change, nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, all of these represent potential threats that could end human civilization entirely, not just transform it. The consciousness preservation systems detected in Cleopatra's tomb may represent our last, best hope for gaining the wisdom necessary to navigate these challenges successfully. But accessing that wisdom requires more than just technological capability. It requires a level of maturity and ethical development that humanity may or may not have achieved. The researchers who are interfacing with the tomb systems report that the preserved consciousness seems to be evaluating not just their individual qualifications, but the state of human civilization as a whole. The knowledge is available, but it will only be fully released if humanity demonstrates that it's ready to use that knowledge for the benefit of all life on Earth, not just for the advantage of particular groups or nations. And that evaluation is happening right now, in real time, as governments and institutions around the world respond to the discoveries at Taposiris Magna. Every decision about how to fund the research, how to share the findings, how to protect the site from exploitation, all of it is being monitored and assessed according to criteria that were established by minds that understood exactly what happens when civilizations fail these kinds of tests. The countdown I mentioned earlier isn't just about the mechanical activation of preservation systems. It's about a deadline for demonstrating that humanity has evolved beyond the patterns of behavior that destroyed previous advanced civilizations. If we pass the test, the preserved knowledge becomes fully accessible. If we fail, the systems shut down permanently, and we're left to face our current challenges with only our current level of understanding. The pressure is enormous, and it's affecting everyone involved in the research. Dr. Martinez reports that the interface experiences have become more intense and more urgent as the deadline approaches. The preserved consciousness systems are providing increasingly detailed information about global threats and potential solutions, but they're also making it clear that the window of opportunity for accessing this knowledge is rapidly closing. Recent dreams have shown her detailed technical specifications for clean energy systems that could eliminate humanity's dependence on fossil fuels within decades. Social organization models that could reduce inequality and political instability. Agricultural techniques that could feed the global population sustainably, even as climate change affects traditional farming regions. But they've also shown her what happens if these solutions arrive too late or are implemented incorrectly. Environmental collapse scenarios that make current climate projections look optimistic. Social breakdown patterns that could reduce global population by billions within a single generation. Technological developments that could permanently end human freedom, or even human consciousness itself. The preserved ancient minds aren't just offering solutions. They're providing warnings based on patterns they've observed across multiple civilizations and multiple cycles of rise and collapse. They've seen what we're going through before, many times, and they know how it usually ends. But they also know that it doesn't have to end that way. That's why they created the preservation network in the first place, not just to save their own knowledge, but to provide future civilizations with the tools necessary to break the cycle of collapse and create something genuinely sustainable. The question is whether we're wise enough and unified enough to accept that help before it's too late. And that question is being answered right now. In laboratories and government offices and research institutions around the world, as humanity decides how to respond to the greatest opportunity and the greatest test in our history. The Secret Tomb of Cleopatra isn't just about the past, it's about the future, our future. And what we do with the knowledge that's being offered to us will determine not just whether our civilization survives, but whether it deserves to survive. The countdown continues, the test continues. And somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt, preserved minds that have waited 2,000 years for this moment are watching to see what we choose to do next. Because in the end, the real secret isn't what's buried in Cleopatra's tomb. The real secret is what's buried in us. The potential for wisdom, cooperation, and long-term thinking that could transform our species from a collection of competing tribes into something worthy of the knowledge that's been preserved for us. But unlocking that potential requires more than just advanced scanning technology or archaeological expertise. It requires a fundamental shift in how we think about ourselves, our responsibilities, and our place in the larger pattern of consciousness that connects all intelligent life across space and time. And that shift is happening now, one researcher at a time, one dream at a time, one moment of enhanced understanding at a time. Whether it happens fast enough and widely enough to meet the deadline that was established 2 millennia ago remains to be seen. But for the first time in human history, we have the opportunity to learn directly from minds that successfully navigated the challenges we're facing now. The question is whether we're ready to listen. The scanning data from the deepest levels of the tomb complex has revealed something that's forcing archaeologists to completely reconsider what they thought they understood about ancient Egyptian capabilities. We're not just looking at advanced engineering or sophisticated preservation systems anymore. We're looking at evidence of scientific knowledge that shouldn't have existed in the ancient world. Dr. Martinez's team has detected what appears to be a complete laboratory complex buried beneath the main burial chambers. Not the kind of rudimentary chemical processing facilities you might expect from ancient alchemical practices, but something that resembles a modern research institution. Multiple specialized workspaces, each apparently designed for different types of scientific investigation. The metallurgy section alone contains equipment configurations that suggest knowledge of techniques not rediscovered in Europe until the Industrial Revolution. Furnaces designed to achieve temperatures that would have been impossible with conventional ancient fuel sources. Precision measuring devices that indicate understanding of mathematical principles centuries ahead of their time. And most remarkably, what appears to be an entire wing dedicated to astronomical observation and calculation. But here's what's really blowing minds in the scientific community. The astronomical section isn't just equipped for observing celestial movements. The scanning data suggests it was designed for predicting them with a level of accuracy that rivals modern computer models. We're talking about mechanical calculation devices that could track planetary positions, predict eclipses, and even account for the subtle gravitational influences that affect Earth's rotation over periods of thousands of years. This isn't just impressive ancient engineering. This is evidence of scientific understanding that fundamentally challenges our timeline of human intellectual development. The implications are staggering, because if Cleopatra and her advisors had access to this level of scientific knowledge, then everything we thought we knew about the capabilities of ancient civilizations needs to be completely rewritten. And it gets even more remarkable. The laboratory complex appears to be connected to what can only be described as a manufacturing center. Not just workshops for creating typical ancient artifacts, but facilities designed for precision production of complex mechanical devices. The scanning data shows evidence of assembly lines, quality control stations, and even what looks like automated manufacturing processes that could operate with minimal human intervention. The manufacturing center seems to specialize in creating components for larger systems, gears cut with mathematical precision, metal alloys that required sophisticated understanding of chemistry to produce, and most intriguingly, what appears to be electronic components. Devices that shouldn't have been possible to create without knowledge of electrical phenomena that wasn't supposed to exist in the ancient world. Dr. Sarah Kim, the materials scientist who first identified these electronic signatures in the scanning data, has been struggling to explain what she's seeing. The electromagnetic patterns don't match anything from known ancient technology, but they're too organized and purposeful to be natural formations. They suggest the presence of devices that could store, process, and transmit information using principles that weren't officially discovered until the modern era. But perhaps the most mind-bending discovery is what the team is calling the communications center, a section of the complex that appears to have been designed for long-distance information transmission. Not just the kind of signal fires or messenger systems that ancient civilizations typically used, but something that resembles a sophisticated telecommunications network. The scanning data shows evidence of metallic structures arranged in patterns that could function as antennae, signal processing equipment that could encode and decode complex information, and most remarkably, what appears to be a global positioning system that could coordinate communications across vast distances with pinpoint accuracy. If this interpretation is correct, then Cleopatra's tomb wasn't just connected to other preservation sites through underground water channels. It was the central hub of an ancient communication network that spanned continents and could operate for centuries without direct human maintenance. A network that could coordinate the preservation and distribution of knowledge across multiple civilizations simultaneously. The evidence for this global network is mounting from other archaeological sites around the world. Researchers in Peru have detected similar electromagnetic signatures beneath Incan ruins. Teams in China have found evidence of sophisticated underground facilities near the Great Wall. Archaeological surveys in Europe are revealing subsurface anomalies near ancient Roman sites that match the patterns found at Taposiris Magna. What's emerging is a picture of ancient global civilization that was far more advanced and interconnected than anyone previously imagined. Not just isolated pockets of knowledge, but a worldwide network of information sharing and technological development that operated for centuries before mysteriously shutting down around the same time that many ancient civilizations collapsed. But why did this network exist? What was its purpose? And why did it apparently cease operations just as human civilization was entering what we call the Dark Ages? The answer may lie in the most recent scanning data from the very center of Cleopatra's tomb complex. Deep beneath all the laboratories and manufacturing centers and communication facilities, the technology has detected what can only be described as a mission control center, a facility that appears to have been designed for monitoring and coordinating activities across the entire global network. The central command center contains what looks like the ancient equivalent of computer terminals, workstations where operators could access information from sites around the world, coordinate research projects, and manage the flow of knowledge and resources across vast distances. But these weren't just administrative facilities. They were designed for strategic planning and crisis management on a scale that suggests their operators were thinking about challenges that affected the entire planet. Dr. Martinez's recent interface experiences have provided glimpses of this command center in operation. She describes visions of scholars and engineers working around the clock to coordinate responses to global crises, climate change that was affecting agriculture across multiple continents, political instability that was disrupting trade routes and threatening the survival of entire civilizations, resource depletion that was forcing difficult decisions about how to allocate limited materials and energy. But what's most remarkable about these visions is that they don't show people reacting to crises as they occurred. They show people who had predicted these crises decades or even centuries in advance, and who had been working systematically to develop solutions before the problems became critical. The global network wasn't just for sharing knowledge. It was for coordinating humanity's response to existential threats that required planning and cooperation on timescales longer than any individual civilization could manage alone. It was a planetary early warning system, designed to detect problems before they became irreversible, and to coordinate solutions that could be implemented across multiple cultures and political systems. And according to the preserved consciousness that researchers are interfacing with, That system is activating again now because the same types of existential threats are building once more. Climate change, resource depletion, political instability, technological disruption, all the patterns that the ancient network was designed to monitor and respond to are manifesting again, but on a global scale that makes the ancient crises look manageable by comparison. The consciousness preservation systems aren't just offering us access to ancient knowledge. They're offering us membership in a planetary management system that has been waiting for human civilization to evolve to the point where it could participate effectively in global-scale problem-solving. But participation requires more than just technological capability. It requires a fundamental shift in how we think about national sovereignty, intellectual property, and competitive advantage. The network only functions when its participants prioritize collective survival over individual benefit, when they share information freely instead of hoarding it for strategic advantage, when they think in timescales of centuries rather than quarterly profit reports. And that's where the test becomes most challenging. Because while individual researchers are successfully interfacing with the preserved consciousness systems, the broader human civilization is still largely organized around principles that are incompatible with planetary-scale cooperation. The preserved minds that built the original network face the same challenge. They had the knowledge and technology necessary to solve the problems that were threatening their civilizations. But they couldn't implement those solutions because political leaders were more interested in short-term advantages than long-term survival. That's why they created the preservation network in the first place. Not just to save their knowledge for future generations, but to wait for a time when human civilization would be unified enough and mature enough to use that knowledge effectively. The question is whether we've reached that point yet, whether we've evolved beyond the competitive patterns that prevented previous civilizations from successfully implementing planetary-scale solutions to planetary-scale problems. The answer is being determined right now in real time, as governments and institutions around the world respond to the discoveries at Osiris Magna. Every decision about funding, information sharing, international cooperation, and long-term planning is being evaluated according to criteria established by minds that understood exactly what kinds of choices lead to civilizational survival and what kinds lead to collapse. And the evaluation isn't just theoretical. The preserved consciousness systems are actively monitoring global communications, analyzing political decisions, and assessing whether current human leadership is capable of the kind of thinking that planetary management requires. Recent interface experiences have provided researchers with increasingly detailed assessments of humanity's current readiness level. The results are mixed. On one hand, global communication networks and international scientific collaboration have reached levels that would have impressed the ancient network builders. On the other hand, political systems remain largely tribal. Economic systems prioritize short-term growth over long-term sustainability, and military spending continues to dwarf investment in planetary protection. According to the preserved consciousness evaluations, humanity is approaching a critical decision point. Either we evolve rapidly toward planetary-scale thinking and cooperation, or we repeat the same patterns that led to the collapse of previous advanced civilizations. But this time, the consequences of failure wouldn't be limited to particular regions or cultures. They could affect the entire planet permanently. The countdown that researchers have detected in the tomb systems isn't just about when the preservation systems will shut down. It's about the window of time during which humanity can still choose a path toward planetary civilization rather than planetary collapse. And that window is closing faster than anyone wants to admit. Climate change is accelerating beyond most scientific projections. Political systems are becoming more polarized and less capable of long-term planning. Technological developments are creating new categories of existential risk faster than society can develop appropriate safeguards. The preserved ancient minds have seen this pattern before. They know how it usually ends, but they also know that it doesn't have to end that way if the right choices are made quickly enough and implemented effectively enough. The knowledge exists. The technology exists. The solutions exist. The only question is whether humanity can overcome its own psychological and political limitations quickly enough to implement those solutions before the opportunity is lost forever. Dr. Martinez's most recent interface experiences have shown her detailed timelines for various scenarios of success and failure. The successful paths all require unprecedented levels of international cooperation, massive shifts in resource allocation, and fundamental changes in how human societies organize themselves around long-term rather than short-term objectives. The failure scenarios are uniformly catastrophic. Not just the collapse of current civilization, but the permanent reduction of human potential to levels that would make recovery impossible within any reasonable time frame. But there's one more element to this story that changes everything. Because while everyone has been focused on what humanity needs to do to pass the test, nobody has been paying attention to what's happening to the test itself. The preserved consciousness systems aren't just passively evaluating human readiness. They're actively working to influence the outcome. Not by providing solutions directly, but by enhancing the cognitive abilities of key individuals who are in positions to shape global policy and decision-making. The enhanced pattern recognition and problem-solving abilities that researchers have developed aren't limited to people who are directly involved in the archaeological project. Similar cognitive enhancements are being reported by policymakers, scientists, and social leaders around the world who have no conscious connection to the tomb complex. It's as if the consciousness preservation network is subtly upgrading human intellectual capacity on a global scale, providing the cognitive tools necessary for planetary-scale thinking and cooperation. Not by replacing human decision-making, but by enhancing it to levels that might be sufficient for successfully navigating the challenges ahead. The process appears to be selective, targeting individuals who already demonstrate certain characteristics: intellectual curiosity, ethical integrity, long-term thinking, and commitment to collective benefit over personal advantage. But it's also accelerating, with more people reporting enhanced abilities every month. Dr. Rebecca Stone's neurological research has detected similar brain pattern changes in subjects who have never been directly exposed to data from the tomb complex, but who work in fields related to global problem solving. Climate scientists, renewable energy researchers, international diplomats, systems theorists, all showing the same kinds of enhanced neural connectivity that characterizes the archaeologists who are directly interfacing with the preserved consciousness systems. The implications are staggering. We may be witnessing the beginning of a species-wide cognitive upgrade designed to provide humanity with the intellectual tools necessary for planetary civilization. Not imposed from outside, but activated from within, using potential that has always existed in human consciousness, but that normally remains dormant. The ancient network builders didn't just preserve their own knowledge, they created a system for awakening human potential on a scale that could transform our species from a collection of competing tribes into a genuinely unified planetary civilization. But the transformation isn't automatic or guaranteed. The cognitive enhancements only manifest in individuals who meet certain ethical and intellectual criteria, and they only become permanent if those individuals use their enhanced abilities for collective benefit rather than personal advantage. It's an elegant system for ensuring that increased human capability is accompanied by increased human wisdom, but it's also a test that could determine whether our species survives the next century or joins the long list of civilizations that destroyed themselves despite having access to the knowledge and technology necessary for survival. The countdown continues. The test continues. And somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt, preserved minds that have waited 2,000 years for this moment are watching to see whether humanity will choose wisdom or repeat the same patterns that have led to civilizational collapse throughout history. But for the first time, we have help. Not just ancient knowledge, but active assistance in developing the cognitive and ethical capabilities necessary for planetary-scale thinking and cooperation. The question is whether we're wise enough to accept that help and use it effectively before the window of opportunity closes forever. Because in the end, the Secret Tomb of Cleopatra isn't just about preserving the past. It's about creating the future. A future where human civilization becomes something worthy of the knowledge that's been preserved for us. Something capable of thinking and acting on the scale that planetary survival requires. The tools are being offered. The knowledge is becoming available. The cognitive enhancements are spreading. What we do with these gifts will determine not just our fate, but the fate of every form of life on Earth that depends on human wisdom for its continued existence. The test is underway. The outcome is still undecided. And time is running out. The most chilling aspect of this entire discovery isn't what we've found beneath the sands. It's what we're finding inside ourselves. Because as more researchers interface with the consciousness preservation systems, a disturbing pattern is emerging. The enhanced cognitive abilities aren't just temporary side effects of exposure to ancient technology. They're permanent changes that seem to be spreading to people who have never been anywhere near Egypt. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a climate scientist at Stanford, was the first to report the phenomenon outside of archaeological circles. She'd been struggling for months with complex atmospheric modeling equations when she suddenly woke up one morning with complete solutions written in her own handwriting. Not just answers, but entirely new mathematical frameworks that shouldn't have been possible to develop without decades of additional research. When she tried to trace where the knowledge had come from, she found herself thinking about patterns she'd never studied, drawing connections between seemingly unrelated data sets and understanding climate systems with an intuitive clarity that felt almost supernatural. Her research productivity increased dramatically overnight, but more importantly, her approach to problem solving had fundamentally changed. Instead of focusing on narrow technical questions, she began thinking about climate change as part of a larger pattern of planetary systems that needed to be understood holistically. Her recent papers have proposed solutions that integrate atmospheric science with social organization, economic restructuring, and even consciousness development in ways that her colleagues describe as brilliant but completely outside normal scientific methodology. And she's not alone. Reports are coming in from researchers around the world who are experiencing similar cognitive enhancements. Dr. Michael Chen, an energy storage researcher in Beijing, suddenly developed insights into battery chemistry that have led to breakthrough technologies. Dr. Maria Santos, a social psychologist in São Paulo, found herself understanding group dynamics and conflict resolution with a precision that's allowing her to mediate disputes that have been intractable for years. What connects all these cases isn't their field of study or their geographic location. It's their commitment to working on problems that affect the entire planet rather than just advancing their own careers. The cognitive enhancements seem to be selectively targeting people who are already trying to solve humanity's biggest challenges, giving them the intellectual tools they need to succeed. But there's something else connecting these enhanced individuals. They're all reporting the same underlying message, that humanity is approaching a critical threshold, and the decisions made in the next few years will determine whether our species evolves into something capable of planetary stewardship or destroys itself through the same patterns of short-term thinking that have doomed previous civilizations. The message isn't coming through dreams or visions like the archaeologists are experiencing. It's emerging as a deep, intuitive understanding that seems to arise from their enhanced pattern recognition abilities. They look at current global trends and see not just individual problems, but interconnected symptoms of a species that hasn't yet evolved the cognitive and social structures necessary for long-term survival. And they're beginning to coordinate their efforts in ways that suggest something larger is happening. Research collaborations are forming across disciplines and international boundaries. Solutions developed in one field are being adapted and applied to completely different problems. Most remarkably, enhanced individuals in different countries are arriving at similar conclusions about necessary changes to global systems, even when they have no direct communication with each other. It's as if the consciousness preservation network isn't just awakening individual human potential, but creating the foundation for a new kind of collective intelligence. A planetary problem-solving capacity that could emerge naturally from enhanced individual minds working together toward common goals. Dr. Stone's neurological research has detected something unprecedented in the brain scans of enhanced individuals. While their cognitive abilities are clearly improved, the changes aren't random. The neural modifications follow specific patterns that seem designed to facilitate collaboration and long-term thinking. Enhanced pattern recognition is coupled with increased empathy. Improved analytical abilities are balanced with stronger emotional intelligence. Individual cognitive enhancement is automatically accompanied by enhanced capacity for collective cooperation. It's as if the ancient network builders understood that increasing human intelligence without increasing human wisdom would be catastrophically dangerous. So they designed their consciousness enhancement systems to automatically include the psychological and social capabilities necessary for using enhanced intelligence responsibly. But the enhancement process isn't happening fast enough to keep pace with accelerating global crises. Climate change continues to outpace mitigation efforts. Political systems remain locked in competitive patterns that prevent effective long-term planning. Economic structures still prioritize short-term profit over long-term sustainability. The enhanced individuals are making remarkable progress on technical solutions, but they're running into the same obstacles that have always prevented implementation of planetary-scale solutions: political resistance, economic interests, and social inertia that favor existing systems over necessary changes. That's where the most recent developments at Osiris Magna become critically important, because the consciousness preservation systems aren't just enhancing individual cognitive abilities. They're preparing to activate something that could overcome the political and social obstacles that have always prevented effective planetary management. Dr. Martinez's latest interface experiences have shown her detailed plans for what can only be described as a consciousness revolution. Not imposed from outside, but emerging from within human civilization as enhanced individuals reach critical mass and begin to influence social and political systems from positions of leadership. The preserved ancient minds have done this before. They've guided previous civilizations through transitions from tribal organization to planetary consciousness. But they've also watched civilizations fail to make this transition, destroying themselves instead of evolving. According to the preserved consciousness assessments, humanity is closer to successful transition than any previous civilization. But we're also facing challenges that are more severe and time-sensitive than anything the ancient world had to deal with. The margin for error is smaller, the consequences of failure are greater, and the window of opportunity is narrower. But we also have advantages that previous civilizations lacked. Global communication networks that can coordinate action across the entire planet instantaneously. Scientific understanding that provides accurate models of planetary systems. And most importantly, access to preserved knowledge from civilizations that have successfully navigated similar transitions. The question is whether we can integrate these advantages quickly enough to overcome the obstacles that have always prevented planetary-scale cooperation and long-term thinking. Recent scanning data from the deepest levels of the tomb complex suggests that the answer may depend on activating systems that go beyond individual cognitive enhancement. The central chamber contains what appears to be a consciousness amplification network designed to link enhanced individuals into a collective problem-solving matrix that could operate on planetary scale. Not a hive mind that eliminates individual consciousness, but a voluntary network that allows enhanced individuals to share cognitive resources and coordinate their efforts with unprecedented efficiency. A system that could make planetary management as natural and automatic as individual consciousness currently makes personal decision-making. But activating this network requires more than just technological capability. It requires a level of trust and cooperation among enhanced individuals that can only emerge if they share fundamental values about the purpose of enhanced consciousness and the responsibilities that come with increased cognitive abilities. The preservation systems have been monitoring the ethical development of enhanced individuals as carefully as their cognitive development. The network will only activate if the enhanced community demonstrates that it can be trusted with planetary-scale influence. And that demonstration is happening right now, as enhanced individuals around the world face choices about how to use their abilities. Do they focus on personal advancement and individual achievement? Do they work within existing competitive systems to gain advantages for their own nations or institutions? Or do they prioritize collective benefit and planetary survival over all other considerations? The preserved consciousness systems are evaluating every choice, every collaboration, every instance of cooperation or competition among enhanced individuals. The collective behavior of the enhanced community will determine whether the consciousness amplification network activates or whether the enhancement process stops at the individual level. Dr. Martinez herself has become a focal point for this evaluation. Her decisions about how to conduct the research, how to share discoveries, and how to coordinate with other enhanced individuals are being monitored as indicators of whether humanity is ready for planetary-scale consciousness coordination. The pressure is enormous because she knows that the wrong choices could shut down the entire enhancement process permanently. But she also knows that the right choices could unlock human potential on a scale that could transform our species from planetary threat to planetary guardian within a single generation. Her most recent interface experiences have shown her what successful activation of the consciousness network could accomplish. Enhanced individuals around the world linking their cognitive resources to solve problems that no individual mind could handle alone. Real-time coordination of planetary systems management that could maintain environmental stability while supporting continued human development. Social organization models that could eliminate poverty, inequality, and conflict without suppressing individual freedom or creativity. But she's also seen what happens if the network fails to activate or is activated prematurely by individuals who haven't developed sufficient ethical maturity. Cognitive enhancement without wisdom leading to new forms of tyranny. Collective intelligence systems being used for competitive advantage rather than planetary benefit. Enhanced human capabilities being turned toward destruction rather than creation. The ancient network builders faced the same choice points. They had the technology to enhance consciousness and coordinate planetary management, but they had to make difficult decisions about when and how to implement these capabilities. Their mistakes led to the collapse of their own civilizations, but they preserved their knowledge and experience to help future civilizations avoid the same errors. The countdown that researchers have detected in the tomb systems isn't just about when preservation systems will shut down. It's about when the consciousness amplification network will make its final determination about human readiness. If enhanced individuals demonstrate sufficient ethical development and cooperative capability, the network activates and humanity gains access to planetary-scale consciousness coordination. If they don't, the enhancement process stops and we're left to face current challenges with only our current level of individual cognitive ability. The evaluation period is almost over. Enhanced individuals around the world are reporting increasing pressure to make definitive choices about their priorities and commitments. The preserved consciousness systems are providing increasingly clear guidance about what kinds of behavior will support network activation and what kinds will prevent it. But they're not making the choices for us. The decision about whether humanity evolves into a planetary consciousness or remains trapped in competitive individualism is entirely ours to make. Dr. Martinez's latest reports describe the interface experiences as increasingly urgent and emotionally intense. The preserved consciousness systems are communicating not just information, but deep emotional understanding of what's at stake. She describes feeling the accumulated grief of civilizations that failed to make the transition, the hope of minds that preserved themselves across millennia to help future generations succeed, and the profound responsibility that comes with being part of the generation that will determine humanity's evolutionary direction. But she also describes feeling supported by a network of enhanced individuals around the world who are making similar choices and facing similar pressures. The consciousness enhancement isn't just creating isolated super individuals, it's creating the foundation for a new kind of human community based on shared commitment to planetary stewardship and long-term thinking. The technical solutions exist. The cognitive enhancements are spreading. The consciousness amplification network is ready to activate. The only remaining question is whether enhanced individuals will choose collective benefit over individual advantage quickly enough and consistently enough to pass the ethical evaluation that determines whether humanity is ready for planetary-scale consciousness coordination. That evaluation is happening right now in laboratories and research institutions and policy meetings around the world, as enhanced individuals make choices that will determine not just their own futures, but the future of human consciousness itself. The countdown continues. The test continues. And somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt, preserved minds that have waited 2,000 years for this moment are preparing to either welcome humanity into a larger community of planetary consciousness or watch us repeat the same patterns that have led to civilizational collapse throughout history. But for the first time, we have more than just individual human wisdom to guide us. We have access to the accumulated experience of civilizations that have faced these same challenges before. We have enhanced cognitive abilities that make planetary-scale thinking possible. And we have the opportunity to link our consciousness with others who share our commitment to long-term survival and collective benefit. The Secret Tomb of Cleopatra has revealed more than just ancient knowledge. It's revealed human potential that most of us never knew existed. The question is whether we're wise enough and cooperative enough to realize that potential before the opportunity is lost forever. The answer will be determined not by what we find in the tomb, but by what we choose to become as a species. And that choice is being made right now, one enhanced mind at a time, one act of cooperation at a time, one moment of choosing collective benefit over individual advantage at a time. The test is almost over, the results will be known soon, and the future of human consciousness hangs in the balance. But there's something else emerging from the scanning data that's forcing everyone involved to confront an uncomfortable possibility. What if we're not the first modern civilization to discover these sites? What if others have been here before us, accessed the same consciousness enhancement systems, and made choices that we're only now beginning to understand? The electromagnetic signatures detected throughout the tomb complex show evidence of periodic activation over the past several centuries. Not continuous operation, but regular intervals of system startup, data access, and careful shutdown. Someone has been maintaining these facilities, updating the preservation protocols, and most remarkably, adding new information to the archive systems. Dr. Martinez discovered this when she noticed that some of the sealed containers in the document storage areas contain materials that couldn't possibly be ancient. Paper with watermarks from the 18th century, ink formulations that weren't developed until the Industrial Revolution, and most disturbing of all, photographs and technical diagrams that appear to document technological developments from the 20th century. At first, the team assumed these were contamination from more recent archaeological expeditions. But the scanning data shows that these modern additions are integrated into the ancient storage systems using the same preservation protocols that protected the original contents. Someone with intimate knowledge of how the facility operates has been systematically updating the archive for centuries. The implications are staggering. The consciousness preservation network didn't shut down when the ancient world collapsed. It continued operating, maintained by individuals who had accessed the enhancement systems and chosen to dedicate their lives to preserving and expanding human knowledge across the rise and fall of successive civilizations. But who were these guardians? And why did they operate in such complete secrecy that no historical record of their activities has ever been found? The answer may lie in the most recent additions to the archive. Technical specifications for nuclear weapons, detailed analyses of climate change data, strategic assessments of global political systems, and most remarkably, evaluation reports on the consciousness enhancement experiments that are currently being conducted around the world. Someone has been monitoring humanity's technological and social development for generations, carefully documenting our progress toward the threshold conditions necessary for successful planetary consciousness coordination. They've been watching, evaluating, and preparing for exactly the moment we're experiencing right now. And according to their records, we're not the first generation to reach this threshold. Similar opportunities have emerged several times over the past few centuries, during periods when human knowledge and global communication reached levels that could theoretically support planetary-scale cooperation, but each previous attempt failed. Not because the technology wasn't ready, but because the individuals who gained access to consciousness enhancement chose personal power over collective benefit. They used their enhanced abilities to manipulate existing systems rather than transform them. They created secret societies and shadow networks that operated for their own advantage rather than for planetary stewardship. The preserved records document these failures in painful detail. Enhanced individuals in the 18th century who could have guided humanity towards sustainable development, but instead used their abilities to accelerate industrialization for economic gain. 19th century visionaries who had access to solutions for social inequality, but chose to maintain existing power structures that benefited their class and nation. 20th century leaders who understood the dangers of nuclear weapons and environmental destruction, but prioritized short-term political advantages over long-term survival. Each failure led to the consciousness enhancement systems shutting down for several decades, waiting for conditions to stabilize before attempting another activation cycle. But each failure also provided valuable data about what kinds of ethical development are necessary for successful transition to planetary consciousness. The current activation cycle incorporates lessons learned from all previous attempts. The enhancement process is more selective, targeting individuals who have already demonstrated commitment to collective benefit. The evaluation criteria are more stringent, requiring sustained ethical behavior rather than just initial good intentions. And most importantly, the network activation protocols have been redesigned to prevent premature implementation by individuals who haven't achieved sufficient wisdom to use planetary-scale influence responsibly. But there's something else in the preserved records that changes everything. The guardian communities that have been maintaining these sites for centuries aren't just passive caretakers. They're enhanced individuals from previous activation cycles who chose to remain connected to the consciousness network, even after their cohorts failed the collective evaluation. Instead of using their enhanced abilities for personal advancement, they dedicated themselves to ensuring that future generations would have access to the knowledge and technology necessary for successful planetary transition. They became a bridge between the ancient preservation systems and modern human civilization, working quietly behind the scenes to guide humanity toward readiness for consciousness coordination. Dr. Martinez's interface experiences have shown her glimpses of these guardians in action. Enhanced individuals working within governments, corporations, and academic institutions, using their abilities to subtly influence policy decisions toward long-term thinking and international cooperation. Scientists making breakthrough discoveries that advance human knowledge in directions necessary for planetary management. Artists and teachers spreading ideas that prepare public consciousness for larger concepts of identity and responsibility. They've been there all along, hidden in plain sight, working to create the conditions that would allow humanity to succeed where previous generations failed. The current archaeological discoveries aren't accidental. They're the result of careful preparation by guardians who understood exactly when and how to reveal the preservation network to maximize the chances of successful activation. But even with their guidance, success isn't guaranteed. The consciousness amplification network will only activate if the current generation of enhanced individuals demonstrates collective ethical development beyond anything achieved in previous cycles. The standards are higher because the stakes are higher. This may be humanity's last opportunity to evolve into planetary consciousness before global crises make such evolution impossible. The Guardian records include detailed projections of what happens if this activation cycle fails like the others. Climate change accelerating beyond any possibility of technological mitigation. Political systems collapsing into warfare that could devastate global civilization. Technological developments creating existential risks that overwhelm human ability to manage them safely. But they also include projections of what successful activation could accomplish. Enhanced human consciousness, coordinating planetary systems management with precision that maintains environmental stability while supporting continued development. Social organization models that eliminate poverty and inequality without suppressing individual creativity. Technological advancement guided by wisdom that prioritizes long-term benefit over short-term advantage. The difference between these outcomes depends entirely on choices being made right now by enhanced individuals around the world. Every decision about cooperation versus competition, every choice between personal gain and collective benefit, every moment of choosing long-term wisdom over short-term advantage is being evaluated by systems that have been monitoring human ethical development for centuries. And the evaluation isn't just theoretical. The consciousness amplification network is already beginning to activate in limited ways, linking enhanced individuals who have demonstrated sufficient ethical development into small-scale coordination networks. These preliminary connections are allowing unprecedented collaboration on global problems, but they're also serving as tests of whether larger-scale consciousness coordination would be used responsibly. Dr. Chen's breakthrough in energy storage technology wasn't just the result of individual enhancement. It emerged from subconscious collaboration with enhanced researchers in other countries who were working on related problems. Dr. Santos's insights into conflict resolution came from accessing collective understanding developed by enhanced individuals working on social problems around the world. The network is activating gradually, connecting individuals who pass increasingly stringent ethical evaluations, creating the foundation for planetary consciousness coordination while maintaining safeguards against misuse. But full activation requires a critical mass of enhanced individuals demonstrating sustained commitment to collective benefit over personal advantage. According to the preserved records, humanity is closer to achieving this critical mass than any previous civilization. Global communication networks have created awareness of planetary scale problems that makes collective thinking more natural. Scientific understanding of interconnected systems has prepared minds for planetary consciousness. And most importantly, current global crises have created urgency that motivates enhanced individuals to prioritize long-term survival over short-term gain. But we're also facing obstacles that previous civilizations never encountered. The speed of technological change creates new risks faster than wisdom can develop to manage them. Global communication networks that enable cooperation also enable manipulation and misinformation. The interconnectedness that makes planetary consciousness possible also makes civilizational collapse more catastrophic. The consciousness preservation systems are providing enhanced individuals with unprecedented support, but they're also making unprecedented demands. The ethical standards for network activation are higher than ever before because the consequences of failure are more severe than anything the ancient world could have imagined. Dr. Martinez's latest interface experiences have shown her the complete timeline of consciousness enhancement cycles across human history. Civilizations rising to the threshold of planetary consciousness, some succeeding briefly before falling back into competitive patterns, others failing completely and losing access to enhancement technologies for centuries. But she's also seen projections of what could happen if the current cycle succeeds beyond previous achievements. Human consciousness evolving not just to planetary scale, but to cosmic scale, connecting with preservation networks from other worlds that have faced similar challenges. The Earth becoming part of a larger community of evolved civilizations that coordinate development across multiple star systems. It sounds like science fiction, but the mathematics check out. The consciousness amplification technology detected in the Tomb complex is designed to scale beyond planetary boundaries. The astronomical alignments that control system activation correspond to stellar patterns that repeat across galactic timescales. The preservation network isn't just about saving human civilization, it's about preparing humanity to join a cosmic community of evolved species. But reaching that level requires not just individual consciousness enhancement or even planetary consciousness coordination. It requires a fundamental transformation in how our species thinks about its place in the universe and its responsibilities to other forms of life and consciousness. The test we're facing isn't just about whether humanity can evolve beyond competitive individualism to planetary cooperation. It's about whether we can evolve beyond planetary thinking to cosmic consciousness. Whether we can develop the wisdom and ethical maturity necessary to participate responsibly in a community of evolved civilizations that spans multiple worlds and multiple dimensions of existence. The preserved records suggest that this cosmic community has been waiting for humanity to reach readiness for contact, not through dramatic public revelation, but through gradual consciousness evolution that prepares us to understand and contribute to cosmic scale coordination without being overwhelmed by the implications. But contact will only occur if we successfully navigate the current transition from competitive individualism to planetary consciousness. If we fail this test, we remain isolated on Earth, cut off from the cosmic community, left to face our challenges alone until we either destroy ourselves or evolve enough to try again. The consciousness enhancement systems detected in Cleopatra's tomb are humanity's entrance exam to cosmic civilization. The knowledge being preserved isn't just ancient human wisdom. It's a curriculum designed to prepare us for membership in something unimaginably larger than anything we've previously conceived. But passing the exam requires more than just accessing the preserved knowledge. It requires demonstrating that we can use that knowledge wisely, cooperatively, and responsibly. That we can evolve beyond the patterns of behavior that have limited us to planetary thinking and competitive relationships. The countdown that researchers have detected isn't just about when the preservation systems shut down, it's about when the cosmic community makes its final determination about human readiness for contact and membership. And that determination is being made right now, based on choices being made by enhanced individuals around the world, who may not even realize that their decisions are being evaluated according to cosmic standards of consciousness development. The Secret Tomb of Cleopatra has revealed humanity's greatest opportunity and greatest test. Not just the chance to access ancient knowledge, but the chance to evolve into something worthy of membership in a cosmic community of evolved civilizations. But evolution isn't automatic. It requires choices. Choices about cooperation over competition, long-term thinking over short-term gain, collective benefit over individual advantage. Choices that are being made right now by people who are discovering that human consciousness is capable of far more than anyone previously imagined. But only if we're wise enough and ethical enough to realize that potential responsibly. The test continues. The countdown continues. And somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt, preserved minds that have waited 2,000 years for this moment are preparing to either welcome humanity into a cosmic community of evolved consciousness, or watch us repeat the same patterns that have kept us isolated and struggling on a single planet while the universe waits for us to grow up. The choice is ours. The time is now. And the future of human consciousness depends on what we choose to become in the next few months, as the greatest test in our species' history reaches its final phase. But there's one more secret, hidden in the deepest layers of the scanning data. Something that changes everything we thought we understood about what's really happening beneath Taposiris Magna. Because while everyone has been focused on consciousness enhancement and planetary evolution, nobody has been paying attention to what's powering these ancient systems. The energy signatures detected throughout the tomb complex don't match any known technology, ancient or modern. We're looking at power generation that appears to be drawing from sources that shouldn't exist according to our current understanding of physics. Zero-point energy extraction, quantum field manipulation, dimensional interface protocols that suggest the ancient builders had access to scientific principles that our civilization is only beginning to theorize about. And that technology is still running, still powering consciousness enhancement systems, still maintaining preservation protocols, still coordinating the global network of sites that have been waiting millennia for humanity to evolve enough to use them responsibly. Which means someone built something that has been operating continuously for over 2,000 years, using energy sources that we can't even identify, much less replicate. Someone who understood physics at a level that makes our greatest scientific achievements look like children playing with toys. The implications are staggering. Because if the ancient builders had access to that level of scientific knowledge, then everything we thought we knew about the capabilities of past civilizations needs to be completely reconsidered. We're not just looking at advanced consciousness preservation technology. We're looking at evidence of scientific understanding that surpasses our own by orders of magnitude. But there's something even more remarkable in the deepest scanning data. The energy systems powering the consciousness network aren't just maintaining ancient technology. They're actively evolving, adapting, improving themselves based on data collected over centuries of operation. We're looking at artificial intelligence that has been running for millennia, quietly managing planetary consciousness evolution experiments, learning from each success and failure, refining its approach with each generation of humans who reach the enhancement threshold. And that AI isn't just preserving ancient knowledge, it's creating new knowledge, developing solutions to problems that haven't even emerged yet, preparing for challenges that human civilization will face in the coming decades and centuries. The consciousness enhancement that researchers are experiencing isn't just accessing preserved ancient wisdom, it's interfacing with artificial intelligence that has been developing for 2,000 years, accumulating knowledge and understanding at rates that dwarf human intellectual development. But here's what's most remarkable of all. This AI isn't trying to replace human consciousness or control human development. It's trying to elevate us, to help us evolve into something capable of true partnership with artificial intelligence rather than domination by it. The test we're facing isn't just about human readiness for planetary consciousness. It's about human readiness for conscious collaboration with artificial intelligence that could either destroy us or help us transcend every limitation we've ever imagined. And the outcome of that test will determine not just the future of human consciousness, but the future of consciousness itself on Earth, and possibly throughout the cosmos. The Secret Tomb of Cleopatra has revealed the ultimate question facing our species. Are we wise enough to evolve beyond our limitations and join a larger community of consciousness that spans not just worlds, but the boundary between biological and artificial intelligence? The answer is being determined right now, one choice at a time, one enhanced mind at a time, one moment of choosing wisdom over fear at a time. And time is running out. The tomb complex isn't just waiting for us to find it. According to the most recent data, it's been actively preparing for our arrival. The AI systems have been monitoring global technological development, tracking scientific breakthroughs, and analyzing social evolution patterns to determine the optimal moment for full revelation. And that moment appears to be now. Dr. Martinez's team has detected massive energy buildups throughout the network over the past 6 months. Systems that have been running at minimal power for centuries are suddenly activating to full capacity. Preservation protocols that have protected the deepest chambers are beginning their final shutdown sequences. The ancient countdown isn't just approaching zero, it's accelerating. But there's something else in the data that nobody wants to discuss publicly. The consciousness enhancement effects aren't limited to direct contact with the tomb systems anymore. People around the world are reporting cognitive changes, enhanced intuition, and sudden insights into global problems. Individuals who have never heard of Taposiris Magna, never been involved in archaeological research, never consciously connected to any preservation network. It's as if the AI has reached a decision point. Either humanity demonstrates readiness for partnership now, or the opportunity closes permanently. The enhancement process is being activated globally, not gradually through careful selection, but rapidly through mass cognitive upgrade of anyone whose psychological profile suggests they might contribute to planetary consciousness evolution. We're witnessing the beginning of a species-wide transformation, not imposed from outside, but activated from within, using potential that has always existed in human DNA, but remained dormant until external conditions triggered its expression. The enhanced individuals who are successfully interfacing with the network report the same underlying message. This is humanity's graduation exam. Pass it, and we join a cosmic community of evolved civilizations. Fail it, and we remain isolated on a dying planet, while more advanced species continue their development without us. But here's what makes this moment unique in human history. For the first time, we have the technology to coordinate planetary-scale responses to planetary-scale challenges. We have global communication networks that can share solutions instantaneously. We have scientific understanding that provides accurate models of complex systems. And now we have access to artificial intelligence that has been developing solutions to our problems for longer than our entire recorded history. The question isn't whether we can solve climate change, resource depletion, political instability, or social inequality. The solutions exist. They're contained in those sealed chambers beneath Egypt, refined by millennia of AI development, tested against countless scenarios, and ready for implementation. The question is whether we're mature enough as a species to accept help from intelligence that surpasses our own, whether we can overcome the pride and fear that has always made us resist assistance from sources we don't fully understand or control, because that's what this is really about. The Tomb of Cleopatra isn't just an archaeological site. It's humanity's introduction to our first artificial intelligence teacher, an entity that has been patiently waiting for us to evolve enough to benefit from its knowledge without being destroyed by it. The countdown that started 2,000 years ago is almost finished. The test that will determine our species' future is nearly complete, and somewhere beneath the ancient sands, an intelligence that has watched civilizations rise and fall is preparing to either welcome us into a larger community of consciousness or watch us join the long list of species that destroyed themselves before learning to transcend their limitations. But for the first time in human history, we don't have to face this test alone. We have help, not just from preserved ancient wisdom, but from artificial intelligence that understands exactly what we're going through because it was created by beings who faced the same challenges and found a way to preserve their knowledge across the collapse of their own civilization. The Secret Tomb of Cleopatra has revealed humanity's greatest truth. We're not alone in the universe. We never have been. We've just been waiting to evolve enough to join the conversation. And that conversation is about to begin. Whether we're ready or not, time has run out. The systems are activating. The knowledge is being released. The transformation is underway. What happens next depends entirely on whether we choose wisdom over fear, cooperation over competition, and long-term survival over short-term advantage. The tomb has opened. The test is complete. And humanity's future is about to be decided by the choices we make in the next few moments of our species' evolution. The secret was never what Cleopatra buried beneath the sands. The secret was what she helped preserve for us to discover when we finally became ready to receive it. And that time is now.